Good morning. I'm laughing to myself because I was daydreaming and all of a sudden I looked down and went, it's 9 o'clock. I'm supposed to be live already. Anyway, I don't know how long ago that was, but it's still only 9, so it's not 9:01 or anything. So we're here. So today I'm going to talk about infection. Not maybe in the way that you think how infection looks or works. But on Monday night during the mental mind treatment, we had several people wanting me to work with infections. So it got me thinking, and I'm going to just put my phone on here in a minute. So, because I want to explain something. And then I thought, yes, let's take a look at how infection works in many ways. Now, basically, we always think of infection, and I'm just going to read off what the dictionary says here. And infecting with germs of disease as through the medium of infected insects, air, water, or, oh, jeepers. Now my phone's decided it doesn't want to be connected. That never happens. What's going on again? That's really ridiculous. But hang on a minute. That's about life. Life does things like that sometimes. So we just want to make sure that we're back on here and we can get back to where I want to be, because it's really interesting on how it all works. Okay, gosh, no, it doesn't want to do it. I am so sorry. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I know it said, because it has a whole list of many different things. The weird thing is I'll turn that off because I'll just get more upset. The computer's on, so obviously we're on Wi-Fi all right there. So anyway, infection. We tend to think of infection as outside, germs, things that are maybe not as good or whatever. But at the very bottom of that list, and I didn't write it out, there were 2 points that talked about ourselves, how we can create an infection. In other words, a blockage within ourselves. And this is what I found for some of the people. One of them in particular, I was able to name how long ago the whole thing had started. And that's the emotional block. And I wrote a lot about that actually in my book called Connecting to the Light, A Frozen Inner Child Transformation. Because it's really about how do we change when we get stuck. So there's 2 things I really wanted to go over today, is that how our mind works, how we work emotionally, and how that can put us into quote unquote an infected state that remains. First of all, one of the things I found very early on when I began to go inward and discover whole lots of things was that we freeze in space and time emotionally, make a big block. And we need to unfreeze those blocks, because in a sense, that's the infection. Whatever age you are, whatever the decisions that you made at that time about things, that continues. So that becomes the infection. That becomes the part that has you stuck, basically, and have you not working. And also, one of the things to remember, when you have that, it robs you also of energy. It robs of energy. Never mind the beliefs and the decisions that are there that consistently show up in your life. And that's one way of identifying them. Not always, but that's one way of identifying them, is to identify where and how that decision or that block came, where you just literally froze. Boy, having a fun time today. So we know that, and I want to just go back a little bit in the sense that we can freeze very early on, quite young, actually, very young, to yesterday. When we have a traumatic event, when we have a situation that takes place, when we have something that affects us emotionally, and we don't process it or through in the moment, and a lot of things happen throughout our lifetime we don't process right away, and then we think, oh well, we'll go, if we're into even thinking about how we think and react, we'll go back later, and we do not, because life continues on. So it's those moments, and we do tend to then recreate the same scenarios. You may have noticed that, or you may not have. The scenarios will have a different way, but the feeling inside, or the feeling that you have the response to, that continues similarly always. And the key is that you can actually go back, find the original source, and transform it. And that's what my book, that's actually where I started all my transformation things. And then I wrote this little book about it. But it's amazing when you begin to realize that we don't think of it as an infection. I never thought of it as infection until Monday night, when all of a sudden, the infection. So many people asking on the same thing. So it's bringing all those things to the surface. So let's take a look at the mental part of it. Is what happens when we're put in a situation that is emotionally overwhelming to us. What happens is that we tend to freeze in that, whether you call it a hysterical moment, or just a freaking out moment, or a real fearful moment, or anything like that. And in that moment that we freeze, all the beliefs that are running through your head at that time are there. All the reactions are there. Everything is there. Right there in that moment of time. Life goes on. Now, we may be traumatized by that experience, whatever it was, for a long time. We may be traumatized, and we don't seem to forget it. It's always there. How is it, where's it working? But what we've got, if we really want to grow, we need to clear those, I call frozen emotional children. But sometimes they can be an adult. It's a name I gave it because that's where we were working with originally. And, when you ask someone, when they're in the space and you say, well, what age were you when this first began or first came? You don't really use the words frozen at that point, but it's really is about you freeze. You just literally freeze. Then the rest of you grows around it. You grow on up. But the tendency can be, if you have that, you might say, seed in there, as you grow on up, what ends up happening, the scenarios happen again, and you freeze. It's in a way, freeze again and again and again. And what also happens is like an energy vampire in a way, because it arrests you. It means that you're not as creative, you're not as forward moving. Many, many, many things that begin to take place, really, in the sense of the direction of where they're heading and where they're going. So it's all very, annoying sometimes. But at the same point, knowing that there's ways in which you can transform this, knowing in some ways in which you can make things much, much easier and better and much more workable. So it's about knowing the process of how first to isolate and set up an inner communication. Now, as a therapist, like a transformational therapist, I don't usually use that word for myself, but that's what I do. Is that when you're working one-on-one like that, is that you have them remember. Then we go in and talk to that other part of you, whether it was 2 weeks ago, whether it was 20 years ago. And the interesting thing is, when I first began this, was it always answers. You ask it a question, but sometimes they're so parts of you are so frozen that and I always use love, you have to unfreeze it. You have to manipulate it in a way. When I say it's like massage it and to have them come aware, because they're so stuck in that scenario that they can't even consider that someone's talking to them, that it's themselves growing up talking to them. So let's consider that there's, you think of yourself and how many traumas you've been through. Some people have very traumatic lives. I had several, but it's like, even as an adult, I've had several I've had to work through. It's like setting up that inner communication with yourself to be able to know the direction that you want to go in. And then when you're really frozen, what I found part of my, I like to use myself because I know me. I used to just sit and even lie in bed sometimes and just run the energy from the bottoms of my feet up through my body, feeling that love source come through, nurturing all the cells. And one day I came across a part of me that was 7 years old. And what was I then? Nearly 60, I guess, around the mid 50s for sure. And I was like, she was so frozen that she looked down and her arms were beside her like a body. She was like a statue. She was not aware of anything at all going on, just frozen in this space. So, because I know what to do, I was able to get the energy flowing, and then finally got her transformed into growing up and joining me in the present, and things like that. So, which is part of the you might say the way we work with the way I work with that, because we want to be as complete as we possibly can in the now, which is now, not back there, not forward. But usually these are all past. So I know how much we can actually freeze. Now, finding this particular 7-year-old, I had several. Seven was a really yucky year for me. I had a lot of 7-year-olds, sort of I dealt with them all. But this one had no movement. There was no sense of awareness or anything. It was just so frozen. And so luckily I knew what to do. And I was able to unfreeze her. I was able to then grow her up and reintegrate her with me and my life. But it's many times, because another thing that happens when it's trauma, especially physical trauma, whether it's from somebody else giving the physical trauma, or whether it's something that happens emotionally and you just don't know how to handle it. A 7-year-old doesn't always know how to handle everything. And then what happens, you can fragment. The first time I ran into this, which set me on this path of figuring out how to transform this, was one of my students was having just a regular session with me. And somehow or other, we got onto that she had gone through an unfortunate situation at 14 where she was attacked. And it wasn't a very pleasant attack at all. And and through that, we realized she split into 3 people at that time, 14 years old. And so we were able to work with each one of those and amalgamate them back into one, grow them up. And from then on, a lot of the situations she was creating in her life changed. And that's when I began to realize I was onto something. Like, okay, how many of us? And so, of course, I looked at myself. I looked at other people who were willing to take a look at where and what wasn't working and how often they repeated patterns. All of those things very often become a sense of letting you know that something isn't exactly correct. Now, remember, at that point, I had done a lot of past life regression work for people. I had done a lot of psychic readings for people. So I had a good base of understanding. And also having to deal with myself, because I certainly wasn't one whole being at that point of time at all. And even now, sometimes I wonder. But it was fascinating for me. And that's where I began. And then from there moved into transforming in a different way, energetically, and tying things in and from a different perspective, and now moving in even deeper into the subconscious. But it's like the transition of it. But let's go back to infection. When you're frozen, whatever belief that you're frozen in is what will be perpetrated into your life. So if you're in a kind of a Ferris wheel type agree thing where you're going round and round and wondering why is this, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that and I'm doing the other, there will be a part of you that is stuck in space and time, and that's the infection. That is what's creating the what would we call it? The belief representing it externally consistently. Now, it may not happen all the time, but it'll come up, it'll pop up if the right circumstances. The key is we need to be as clear as we possibly can in order to be able to have our lives work the way we want them to work. We get the results that we want. And when we'll still have stuff come up, but we'll process it so differently because we haven't got all these little other pieces stuck in there. We haven't got other belief systems that are, jamming each other sometimes. Sometimes it's amazing when we split, if we're going to split, and we don't always split, sometimes we just freeze. But when we split, each one of them will have a different belief system. That's what's fascinating. What are the belief systems going on? And it's really interesting because sometimes I have to stop and go back to some of that work I did to aid and help people now. Now I'm able to integrate things easily now for people, but it's still consciousness isn't really important. That is the sense of how much you actually are aware, what it is that you really, really know. So we want the consciousness to be aware. See, a lot of times we think we just change that, a person like myself can just change that and that's enough, but it isn't enough. The person has to be aware. And in becoming aware, what begins to happen is they're aware when that an aspect of themselves is taking over. So today we're calling it the infection because that's what it actually becomes. It becomes an affected element of ourselves. It's affected by a situation that has happened and the decisions it makes. Now, another interesting facet into this is that the decisions that you make are usually, especially if they're young, well, I would say probably anyway, doesn't matter. You reach back into past life information. You reach back in your memory banks and you remake a same decision that you've made before. That's why in my work, when I started working with past lives and past life regression work, how important it was to begin the idea that we can transform and change things when we go back there, find out what's happening. And sometimes we basically are looking at the end result in this life from situations that have happened in other lives, sometimes many, 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 many lives, repeated patterns. So look at your life now. And do you want to carry all that with you into the next life if that's what you're going to do? Most people reincarnate. It's like, we got to get this right. So we keep working at it. But if you don't change, I'm getting a little dictatorial here. So, pardon that, pointing my finger. But if you don't really change those belief systems that are there, if you don't work with those, then they will repeat. They will repeat. And sometimes it's a matter of finding them. When you find them, really make sure you have them made a note, I'm stumbling over my words here, make a note of it inside. Because very often we all know something's not right, but we're not checking what isn't right. What thought is it? What feeling is it? Because it goes two ways. We've got two aspects we're always working with, our mind and our feelings. And either one of them can grab us and put us into a frozen state, which I call for years the inner frozen children. But sometimes it could be an adult. And we worked with the idea or concept of children because that's where a lot of it is happening. But it's also, you can do this as an adult as well. And so you want the energy streaming right through the whole of your life without these blockages. So as I said, that was where I began doing. Well, the past life regression was probably the beginning of doing the transformation because we could because what I did, whatever the life was, I also brought the energy back into this life to be able to clear out what was brought in from those decisions from those lives. So that was when I first began transformational work. Then I moved into this frozen children stuff. And then from then into transformation, because I saw there was so much more. And I knew how to clear it very, very easily. And it works. And now, of course, now I've finally figured out how to actually pull the plug on the subconscious. And even that, sometimes I find people just reinstate it. That's what, it's so funny. We think if we can pull it, that's it, done. No, because the person's habits will go and reinstate it because it's what they know. So you're going to take a good look at your life sometimes when you do this work. You got to really look at it and say, what's working for me and what isn't working for me? Where am I tripping myself up? And I know for myself, because many of you know, I've been going through this cancer thing, and it's like I kind of, not kind of, I do know how come I created that. I do know where I wasn't being honest with myself and dealing with my feelings effectively, and so now I have a result. But it's hanging on in a way that says to me, I still haven't got to the base of it, and I guess I don't want to look. Like, I'm just like everybody else, but I'm getting more and more determined because I'm getting fed up with myself. So it's like thinking of it as an infection rather than I've done something wrong. I've got an infection here. So let me go figure this infection out and do the work that will clear it. And a lot of that has to do with loving yourself, not beating yourself up because you're not perfect. Not absolutely deriding yourself because you're not being as good as you think you should be, or something like that. Because that is the infection there. If you don't recognize that you are loved, that you are worthy, that all of those things that really are important, because they are true. You are worthy. Because this life that you're in now is one life of many lives. One life of many. And you want to make the best of it. I've had a great life in so many ways. And yes, I've had my turmoils and had my struggles, like all of us, which I think makes me a better reader, a better therapist all the way around, because I understand. I've been there, done that. But I also have had my infections. I've never thought of it that way before until Monday night. When in the mental mind, if you haven't touched into the mental mind treatments on Mondays, go check some of the back ones out where I use a prayer technique that I learned years ago and sort of changed it to Norma style a little bit. But it's like amazing the information sometimes that will come out. But it was really strange that we had people, one after the other, talking about an infection that they had. So that got me really thinking, what is this infection thing? And I ask, and they give me the answer. They being people that work with me, talk with me. Yeah. So I wanted to share this with you today and let you know, if you are interested, you can go to my website and you can get a PDF copy of Connecting to the Light, a Frozen Inner Child Transformation, because it's the light that does the big transforming. But it's not just transforming, it's growing it up to integrate it with you in the present so that you become full. And the infection that has you maybe acting like you don't want to act, think like you don't want to think, feel like you don't want to feel, etc., it's cleared up. One of the things that came through was a little bit of the energy part, where when there's a really strong infection that isn't really taken care of, it depletes your energy, and then you always feel tired, or you always feel like you're forcing yourself to do things that you want to do, but it's like, oh, it's just a little too much. So think about that. All these things are available, which we can do. We can transform the energy. We can, and painlessly, really, painlessly, and become more whole, more, I've got Some of my clients have been working with me for a lot of years. Anything comes up, they get hold of me because they know that we can look at it and we can clear it out and then move on into the next level. Because have you ever been, I've been to places where there's been different colored soils laid down. And in some ways, we're a little like that. We have layers upon layers upon layers. Sometimes we have complications happen when we're very, very young. We have situations come up that the parents don't mean sometimes. Sometimes it's just an innocent thing a parent does. And I can give you an example of this. Now, I have older parents because when I was born, my sisters before me were just turning 16 and 19. And then I arrived. 3 years later, this a month, my brother arrived, the first boy. My older parents, so he was in a bassinet and he started crying. Now just think about this. This had an impact on my life. He started crying. I, 3, ran to the bassinet to look in, because I was concerned the baby was crying. My mother came, swept me aside with her arm, totally, just didn't even say, get out of the way, swept me aside with her arm to reach for the baby. That scenario had a huge impact on my life. I made a lot of decisions about who I was, what I was wanted. It was like a whole list with that one action. Now, all of us have had one action. We've all had 100 actions. And that's where we get infected. Because whatever beliefs that you may be carrying from other lifetimes, other situations, will jump into 4. And so when I think back, that one scenario, when I found that, when I remembered that scenario, it was like everything fell into place. Because in a way, I wasn't getting attention. 3-year-olds love to be, give attention too. And all of a sudden, there wasn't the attention. Then it got more complicated because my sister arrived. One of my sisters arrived with 2 kids. And so in this little house, it was like where was I? But actually, she became my kind of second mother over the years. So, but it's like so many things happen when you're a child that you never remember until you're able to go back into your memory banks. And that one thing that can make a decision, all these, I'm unworthy, I don't know what to do, I'm useless, I'm incapable, all those things pop into your head. And that infection from those decisions, I want you to see that it's not like you picked up a bug. What happened, a situation happens, you make a decision based on previous lifetimes, activities, whatever, that now have infected your life. I have not thought about it till Monday, and I've spent time contemplating that since Monday. Just think of that. We're a petri dish with all these things bubbling around, but we can deal with that. We can handle that. And there are ways we can handle that, thank goodness. And I have been so fortunate and led by my guides, people that talk to me and taught to me over the years, to lead me to understand how energy works, how these things take place. And even now, they're teaching me how to go in and pull these subconscious programs. And sometimes I find my clients, we clear them, and then I find that they put them back because they still hang on to the old way of behavior. Their infection is so strong that they don't really want to let it go. So that's the way it works. But anyway, I trust this will help you understand a little bit more how, in a sense, we infect ourselves based on our decisions and based on our experiences of how things happened. But when we know that we're loved, when we know that we're worthy, when we know that everything is A-OK, we take a deep breath and we go ahead and go forth. So I just want to thank everybody. I've had some new subscribers coming again. And if you're listening, I want to say thank you. It's always a pleasure for me to see a new subscriber has arrived. Also, secondly, thank you for your consistency, sending me comments. I just finished writing up replies to the comments before I came on the show. And there's so much happening that's just delightful. So I'm just going to look at the comment section. I always say after I've done my talk, I will address them. And Lisa Marie says, good morning. And she says, I've been dealing with this frozen for almost 4 years after traumatic experience. It has seriously affected my brain and nervous system. Oh, it will. It will, because the decisions that you make and everywhere else you go. And Yvonne says, good morning, Norma. Yes, transformation is why I'm so big on transformation and making sure that, and I haven't thought of infections before, but we can call them about the frozen children or where we get stuck or whatever. But now it's like I realize it's your infection. You infect yourself. So I think my phone, for some reason, has decided to come back into play. So I did want to read you this because but it doesn't want to do this one. Hang on, let's see. Aha, can I just do this? Because I really wanted. I'm going to pick out, I think I read the first one. The one I wanted to pick out was the infecting of germs of diseases through the medium of infected insects, air, water, or clothing. But when we go down further, it says an infecting agency or influence, an infectious disease, the condition of suffering an infection. Most of us do that all through our lives. Now we understand. Corporation of another's opinions, beliefs, moral principles, etc. It's called moral contamination. That was when I sparked up when I read that, because that's what I looked at. Like for me, it was get out of the way. And that really where I had to do several situations on that particular event to clear that totally. So wonder I even remembered it. And the next one was an influence or impulse passing from one to another and affecting feeling or action. That's why we could look at these situations that we have in our lives, which has influenced our behavior, our personality, our responses as an infection. Well, you have a good day today. I will be back on Sunday with a Sunday thought. And if you have any way of clearing some of those infections, go ahead. Otherwise, let me know. Thanks a lot. You have a great day. Bye now.